All right, class. So, for the sake of trying to really just focus on what you need to concentrate heavily on for the purpose of your finals preparation, I'll just kind of highlight the major points that you can actually see on your final exam study guide as well. So, here you have Freud's psychosexual stages of development, which Erik Erikson actually piggybacked off of Freud's sexual stages of development and went forward and created the psychosocial stages of development. So you may remember that when we were talking about this information in chapter 4 in the textbook with lifespan and development. And it started out in infancy with trust versus mistrust. And basically, what he did was he took Freud's theory, removed kind of the sexually driven components out of it, and also extended it from infancy past puberty to infancy to death. So that's just give me a little bit of background information about that. So be familiar with these stages and also the ages that are associated with the stages. So the first stage is the oral stage, 0 to 18 months. When Freud originally theorized this, you can look back at, if you can find kind of some old original theories from Freud and his thoughts actually on the psychosexual stages of development, you will see that it was very sexually driven, but they've kind of reformed it a bit to make it a little bit more sense and less incestuous. So with the oral stage, the focus, because the psychosexual stages, you will see in your reading, you will see anything that you do research on, that you'll see the word over and over again, a fixation. And so what a fixation is that it's something that someone is fixed on or focused on. And so the stages are all about what you are focused on during that particular stage and age. So from 0 to 18 months, the focus, the fixation is on everything orally. And so when we're talking about everything orally, when you think of it in terms of infancy, when they first come into the world, that is a huge area of concentration because that's their whole way of survival is through their mouth orally, whether they're being breastfed or whether they're being formula fed through a bottle. That is a concentrated, focused area at that particular time. And that area continues to be a focal point as they grow and develop into early toddlerhood, where we're talking about, okay, after they get a little bit older, they start going through the teething phase. So as you can see, first we have sucking, that's kind of for survival, and then we have biting. With the biting, they're cutting teeth. So a lot of times their gums are irritated, and so that's an area of a focal point where infants are putting things in their mouths. They're doing a lot to really try to soothe those gums because they're irritated because they're finally cutting teeth. And then ultimately you're going to progress from them doing formula or breastfed to where we're starting to introduce table foods, where you see kind of the last area as chewing. And so that is a very critical focal point or fixation during that stage, because that's really what we're kind of making sure that it's being developed correctly, making sure that they are progressing and meeting their milestones. So oral stage, we got the kind of area there. And you'll see pleasure, 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 pleasure. That's where that whole sexual context came from, because trust me when I say it was a very strong sexual content. And so originally, when he was discussing the oral phase, he also went further into how how they would use the term the man, a man is a breast man. The guy is a breast man, and it's because he lactated from his mother's breast, and it was a fixation there with his mother's breast. So as he developed and got older as a man, he just had a fixation on breast, and it was because of being breastfed. And his whole focus was kind of like getting a sexual pleasure out of it, some type of sexual gratification out of it, which is why he termed it psychosexual stages of development. So again, like I said, they kind of refined it to make it make sense, because he was a genius when you think about it. He really was a genius when he was talking about a lot of these and theorizing a lot of these concepts. He was absolutely correct. He just had a lot of sexual content in it. And so when you start removing that sexual content, you really started to see like how amazing this guy was with his theories, because he was the first person to even say these things, notice these things, make these observations, give these observations and things that he theorized actual names. So he was definitely before his time with a lot of his theories. He was a psychological genius, just kind of very eccentric, I'll say, for lack of better words. All right, next phase I'll move on to is the anal stage, 18 to 36 months. So this is kind of getting in the heart of toddlerhood, where the focus, the fixation is all about the bowel and the bladder elimination. And with the bowel and bladder elimination, when you think about this particular stage, what is a huge focal point? What is a huge fixation? Potty training. We're trying to get these kids, we're trying to get these children, the toddlers, to transition from diapers to a lot. Sometimes the transition is from diapers to pull-ups to the potty to where they're wearing big boy underwear and big girl panties and things like that. So it's a huge, it is a huge area, huge time of really trying to make that transition for them to be a little bit more independent. And so where you see the coping with demands for control, they're really trying to grasp, and I'm talking about the toddlers now. The toddlers are really trying to grasp a demand for control and independence, because they were totally relying upon you at the very, very beginning of that phase, because they were still wearing diapers. And so with them still wearing diapers, but yet they are able to pick up things, and yet they're able to, even at this age, they're able to talk a little, and they're even able to walk around, and they can feed themselves, and you have all these things, and it's like, okay, this one thing you telling me I gotta lay down and for you to still change me. And so they're really trying to gain that control and that independence during that particular time. So you'll kind of see that push, pull, and tug as they are trying to say, "Hey, I'm big. I'm a big boy. I'm a big girl." You'll oftentimes see a child that if they have a child that is very close to them in age, but yet one child has been potty trained and wearing big boy underwear, versus the other one that may still be in a pull-up and trying to make that transition. The one that's wearing underwear will say, "Well, that's a baby. The one that's wearing the pull-up, they're a baby. I'm a big boy. I'm a big girl." But just totally, solely based on just their ability to control their bowels and bladder. All right, phallic stage. Now, stick with me here with the phallic stage. It was really far out there previously. They've done the best they can do, but if you kind of stick with me, it still will make sense of how they refined it. So phallic stage is from 3 to 6 years old. And at this stage or age, the pleasure zone is in the genitals. And initially, Freud was saying that they have children, 3 to 6 years old, are fixated on pleasuring themselves for a sexual satisfaction. So he was saying that little girls are pleasuring themselves, basically masturbating, and little boys are basically masturbating for the purpose of a sexual pleasure. That's not true. That's not true at all, because they don't have a inkling of sexual pleasure. They don't have a clue of what that is. What happens during this stage and why this becomes an area of fixation or focus is it's like the 3 to 6 year old somehow has bypassed that they've had the boy parts or the girl parts the whole time, and so all of a sudden they become very interested in the parts that they have, the parts that you have, why your parts are different, and what these parts do. And so it's it's so amazing to them. Now with the girls, you don't see so much of the, I would say, masturbation, really kind of like by mistake. You don't see that very often, but it does occur. It occurs more often in boys during these ages, and let me explain. You see it more often in boys than girls because boys have the external parts versus young ladies when we're talking about the genitals. So it's different there. With young ladies, this still can occur because they're trying to figure out what's this here. Well, what does it do? And they're touching and they're bothering, and boys do the same thing. Boys are touching it, boys are bothering it, and if you've ever been around any little boys during these years and they've ever come to you saying that their genitals hurt and they actually have an erection, it's because they were discovering I have this. They've done all kinds of things of where they're just kind of messing with their genitals. And so no matter what age you are, your body is still going to react the same way. You have stimulated that particular part, certain things are going to happen no matter the age. What I always try to get students to understand is that although it is termed or looked at as masturbation regardless, the child isn't doing it for the purpose of being sexually pleasured. They're just amazed that they have this. They're messing around with it and they're trying to figure out what it does and why they have it. And so it's just really a time of discovery for them. And so that's why this occurs. The next part to this is coping with incestuous sexual feelings. Incest is basically what Freud theorized. So, I can't agree with him on that one. But really, what he was saying here, and he came up with the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex, and those two complexes is all about incest. With the Oedipus, if you think back to, if you've ever heard of the story of Oedipus with Greek mythology, Oedipus killed his father because he was in love with his mother. And so that's that whole incest thing that Freud is like, boys are in love with their mother, so therefore they are in competition with their father. So that's why you have a mama's boy, and that's why you have a daddy's girl. With him terming it based on Greek mythology, Oedipus didn't even know that was his dad. At that, he didn't know that was his dad. He didn't know that was his mom, because they had given Oedipus away. Oedipus was supposed to be dead, so they didn't even think they had a son because the fortune teller told them that their son was going to grow up one day and kill them. So when the fortune teller told the king that, then he said, "Hey, we got to kill this baby because they're not going to come back and kill me." But the person never killed the baby, and so Oedipus ended up being raised by someone else and grew up as an adult man, fell in love with his mother, which he didn't know that was his mother, and was in conflict and battle and killed his father because he was fighting for the affection of his mother, which is totally not what he's saying here. So that's really, you see it with kids as far as they'll model the same-sex parents' behavior for the affection of the opposite sex parent. And let me describe that here. Like if a boy saw his dad kiss his mom and grab her face, the young man would do the same thing because my dad loves my mom so much, I love my mom so much, I'm going to do the same thing when they don't realize it's a difference. Or when a little girl will say, when I grow up, I'm going to marry my daddy. The little girl doesn't really want to marry her dad. She has no clue about all of that. She just knows she loves her dad a whole lot. and that's her favorite guy in the whole entire world. And so their thoughts when it comes to anything about sexual gratification or sexual pleasure is so far off from where Freud was, but I have to explain it to you so that you understand what it's talking about. All right, latency. Latency is actually, this is 6 years to puberty. This is the only stage that Freud does not talk about any type of sexual pleasure, gratification, fixation, focus. Here he says, this is the stage. Imagine that, 6 years to puberty. That blows your mind altogether because puberty, your dormant, your feelings about sex is now non-existent. I think not. So it's just so ironic that he chose that during this time. But here he's saying that the feelings of sexual pleasure is dormant. Nobody's, the males are not thinking about sex, females are not thinking about sex. And so what happens during this particular stage is that you see a lot of same-sex friendships, and kind of like anti-opposite sex friendships. So, you may see a group of boys that want to hang together, and a girl may try to come in and say, "Hey, can I play with you guys?" "Oh God, no, no, no girls allowed. Girls are gross." And the same thing with girls. No, boys, oh my gosh, no, no boys allowed. This is girls only. Why would you want to hang with us? And so that's what he's saying that occurs at this time. I agree, but not up into puberty. I think this probably occurs from probably about maybe 6 to 9. I wouldn't even go past 9 years old, because I would say around 10, kind of depending on how, and definitely with the evolution of how our children are maturing and reaching puberty at much earlier ages now. I would be willing to say that those sexual feelings and reaching puberty, or even a little bit of a hint of a sexual interest, would start to occur probably around like 10 or 11, just really driven by the hormones in puberty though. And it's really just kind of like interest. They want to know about it versus kind of trying to be pleasured. Want to know what is that, all those things. All right, and then last stage, genital, which is puberty on. It doesn't give you a stopping point, but basically puberty on, I guess, until you die, because it doesn't have a stopping point. And so this is when basically, hey, it's back on, and here are all the parts of, the areas of interest about sexual pleasure and sexual gratification and desires and same sex, opposite sex, all of these things. So this is Freud's psychosexual stages of development, pretty much described in depth, just so you all can understand it a little bit better, and understand where Freud was coming from. All right, also, you will see this on your final exam study guide. I want you to be familiar with the defense mechanisms. It's going to be a chart I'll go over with you all in just a second. But what defense mechanisms are the methods that the ego uses as a protector. And the protector, what it does is it reduces anxiety by distorting our reality to some degree. So the first one you see is repression, but let's go ahead and just look at the chart. All right, so I'm going to make this chart a little bit bigger. Can we see the information? That didn't make it so great. Let's see here. All right, so do they not have repression? Okay, they don't have repression on this chart, so let me go back. All right, so repression. You may remember the term repression when we were talking about memories. Memories, when you repress something, this is when you try to push something down, especially in your memory bank, to the point of where it is outside of your conscious awareness. And it's because it is something that is causing, it's some type of memory that is causing you some level of distress, whether it is anxiety, whether it is a previous trauma, something that makes you upset, something that makes you sad, angry, um, whatever feelings that you would consider negative feelings. That is what motivates us. It's a motivated type of forgetting is what repression is. And so repressed urges may appear as symbols in dreams or slips of the tongue, but again, those are the things that we push down because we don't want to consciously be aware of them all the time, because that would really affect our psyche quite often. And so we would probably be a society of people that walk around very angry, very upset, very sad. When you think about society, it's not very far from that, but but I mean, not all of us are like that. But with repression, I guess the other kind of underlying part of it is that with repression, it's not permanent. And so, with it not being permanent, that means that it ends up creeping up some type of way of where it plays out in your life. And you don't even realize it until kind of after it happens. So, if you've ever heard the term Freudian slip, where you've said something that you didn't mean for it to come out. You meant it. You most likely meant it, but you were so amazed that it just slipped totally out of your mouth that you were in shock just as well as the other person who reciprocated what you said. So that's where repression will come up. And then it'll also kind of play out in our dreams as well. That's one of the defense mechanisms. To continue on, we have regression. Regression is when I would say this is more of a kind of defense mechanism that is driven by anxiety, because what you do is you basically regress, you retreat, you go back to a earlier stage. And here it says a psychosexual stage, but when we look at the psychosexual stages, it's really based on our age. So when you regress, you retreat, you go back to a earlier stage in life where at that particular stage in life, you weren't experiencing that type of anxiety. You go back to what was considered, kind of like your comfort zone. And so when you go to your comfort zone, you feel safe. The anxiety is lessened or depleted altogether. And so that's what we tend to do. But again, it's to protect ourselves from actually having to deal with what has been presented to us at that particular time. So if you see a person that, let's say it could be a grown adult, and when they take finals, you may see a grown adult, bulky, muscular guy that looks like they body build, and this is just a dude you just would never mess with. And during the finals, you see this guy over there sucking on his thumb. He's sucking on his thumb because he has a great deal of anxiety from final exams. So sucking on his thumb is what calms him. So he's able to get through the exam because he's doing the thing that made him calm, and something that he started most likely when he was a very young child. And he regresses, goes back to a earlier stage in life where that type of anxiety is dealt with in a way that gives them a coping mechanism and calms them. So here they gave an example. A little boy reverts to the oral comfort of thumb sucking in the car on the way to his first day of school. But you can see this in adults. It is, it can go that far back. I have a sister who, when she gets nervous, she's had what she's called a rag, and really it's a cloth, and it's a cloth. It could be an old dress, it could be an old shirt or whatever. Even as an adult, my sister is like 30. I'm the oldest, so my sister's like 33. And so what she does when she's nervous, she still carries this rag in her purse. And so when she's nervous or having anxiety about something or upset, she will go off and like sneak and sniff her rag. It's so bizarre. But it's a retreat for her. It calms her down, it soothes her, and it's almost like a reset for her. So that's what she does, even as a grown woman, but that's what she used to do as a kid. So that's regression. Reaction formation, when you switch unacceptable impulses into their opposites. So, good example, you repress, push down angry feelings, and a person displays exaggerated friendliness. So, instead of actually having a outward expression of being upset, you are almost trying to overcompensate that you're not upset by trying to show and fake um, like you're happy. And so that's the reaction formation. Projection. This is when we disguise, try to hide our own threatening impulses by attributing them to someone else or others, as is listed here. So, great example. The thief thinks everyone else is a thief. Why? Because he steals, so everybody else must steal too. So you're projecting your own stuff that you know is wrong, that you know you don't like, onto to other people because it's less threatening for you. Hey, I do it, they do it too. You just don't see them doing it. It just makes that person feel better. That's all, because they know they're wrong. But it protects their ego. All right. Rationalization. All right. Offering self-justifying explanation in place of a more real, threatening, unconscious reason for someone's actions. So this would be the person trying to rationalize why they smoke cigarettes. They will know that smoking cigarettes is awful for them. You will ask them, yes, they're awful. Worst things. Don't I would tell anybody, don't you ever start smoking. But yet they smoke. And they say, well, why do you smoke if you feel that strongly about it? Oh, I have to. It relieves my stress. That's rationalizing. Or if you saw a person that was started drinking and they were drinking at 11 o'clock in the morning, and you're like, wow, you're already drinking? Have you had breakfast yet? And that person says, hey, 5 o'clock somewhere. They're rationalizing. So we've all used at least 2 or 3 of these things. All right, next one, displacement, shifting sexual or aggressive impulses toward a more acceptable or less threatening object or person. When I'm giving you the example about the little girl, that would be the use of an aggression impulse versus a sexual. So I just didn't want that to be confused. So because the little girl is mad, maybe because she got in trouble and her mom told her that she had to be in timeout for 10 minutes. Now she can't talk back to her mom. She can't do these things. So instead of talking back to her mom, or, hitting her mom or something like that, what does she do? She goes and kicks the family dog. Because the family dog can't do anything to her. It's just a dog. So I can do that because the dog is my dog. I have ownership over it. And if I kick the dog, so what? But I got my anger out. This would be like another example would be a person that you make them extremely angry, and because this person is not going to physically hit you, the person punches a hole in the wall. Well, they're punching a hole in the wall because they probably wish it was you, but they can't hit you because of some consequences that will follow, but yet they hit the wall. That would be displacement. All right. You'll see displacement when they talk, to give you an example for the shift in the sexual impulses. This will be like guys in jail that you see start to do like a lot of exercises and push-ups and things like that. They do that because they don't have much of an outward expression or release for that sexual, aggression that's built up. So they have to do something to kind of get their mind off of it. So they shift it. All right. And then denial. We're definitely familiar with that. Refusing to believe or even perceive something as a painful reality. We ignore it. We act like it doesn't happen. It's not happening to us. It doesn't exist. Everything is fine. And so it's all of this is really temporary. It just temporarily allows us to not have to deal with the emotion at hand. And so here, an example, a partner denies evidence of his loved one's affair. He doesn't want to deal with that right now. If he had to acknowledge that his loved one, his wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, is having an affair, then you got to deal with all the ugly components of it, of being hurt and uh, probably breaking up, and why did you do this to me, and all these other just negative emotions that are associated with it. So guess what, I don't want to deal with that. I choose not to deal with it, so I'm just going to act like it didn't happen. And so that's very temporary. If you can defense mechanisms, we have to be very careful with the use of them, because that can come back and haunt us, and it can really make us blow up, and make our psyche very damaged, and it doesn't help us with processing. So I just wouldn't use them very often, but we tend to use them. Here you have some Neo-Freudians. I'm not really asking about the Neo-Freudians on your final, but who they were individuals that previously thought that, hey, I think Freud is a great guy, but man, he lost us when he started talking about all this sexual pleasure, gratification, fixation, focus, children, having orgasms, and children masturbating. Like, this guy is far out there. And so they're kind of like the anti-Freudians. So you have Alfred Adler, Karen Horney. Karen Horney, she stated that, what did she state? No, Freud stated that women had penis envy. And with the penis envy was that, he didn't actually mean that women wanted to have a penis. It was women wanted everything that came with what represented a man. And what I mean by that is status. And you got to think back during these times, status, the ability to be a leader, the ability to make money, have jobs, be something more than a teacher and a mother, So Freud theorized that, and Karen Horney said, oh, no, sir. If that's the case, then men have womb envy. You all want to be like women. You want to be able to carry and bear children. And so, that's where she was kind of like went wrong with him. Alfred Adler, he was, he focused on the inferiority and superiority complex, and we'll focus on just the inferiority complex here. But when you feel inferior to someone, it's like that person, you feel like you're less than that person, and like you don't measure up, and so that's what the inferiority complex was all about. And then Carl Jung, I know it looks like Jung, but it's Jung. He was actually very close with Freud, and Freud called him his, what did he call him? His adopted son. He really, really liked Jung because he thought, man, we have a lot of the same thoughts. But as Jung started to get to know Freud much better, his theories, his thoughts, his practices, his methods, he started to feel like, I can't stick with you on that. So he became more focused on repressed thoughts and feelings, but not necessarily having to deal with childhood trauma or things like that, which was really Freud's whole kind of thought process behind repression. And unconscious exerts a powerful influence. Yeah. So those were the Neo-Freudians. All right. Here I am going to be asking you all about projective tests, so you will see that on your final exam. And so projective tests that were used were thematic apperception test, TAT. You also had another test that was called the Rorschach ink blot test. That was a projective test. And these tests were widely used to analyze a person's psyche. So the ink blot, a person will be shown this, okay, and based on what the person said was supposed to give the therapist an idea for the therapist to then be able to analyze that based on that client's answer. This was what this is what this client was experiencing, or this is what they meant by stating this. And that's very, very subjective, because I can look at this and say it's two bleeding eyes, and the person is spitting up blood and out of the mouth, but that wouldn't mean that I am experiencing any type of trauma or possessing some type of dark area in my life. It could really, literally be just looking like something that I've seen before. That's the reason why I said that. And so they weren't heavily reliable when you started kind of getting down to it, because it was based on what the therapist thought and analyzed. It was their thoughts. It was their analyzation based on what the client said to them. The thematic apperception test, I want to show you all an example of that. Show you real quick. And these are images, okay? And so the thematic apperception test here was a client would be shown an image, and the image is for the client to then create a story based on what they saw in the image. As you can see, we can create any kind of story here. And what I mean by a story is not, if I show this to my client and said, okay, what do you see? I see a woman holding on to the doorknob. She looks like she's sobbing. It's the guy in the bed. I'm not asking about the events, like what you actually see. What do you think is going on here? What's the story here? And so I could say, well, I think that is, I think that's his, I think they're a couple, and I think she's crying and upset because he's come home drunk again, or he's come home and he started to abuse her, and so she's just sick of it. We could create. I've heard so many stories when I've shown these different images to students. We can create all kinds of stories, but because of the story that I tell, does not mean that it's something that I am personally experiencing. Does not mean that I was driven to say this is what I saw. It could have been something I saw in a movie, and that's the reason. That's what prompted me to say that. So again, you started to see therapists kind of go away from using that because they really weren't reliable. All right, so those are projective tests. I want you to be familiar with those. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I want you to pull from here. All right, we pretty much covered that. Humanistic theories, we pretty much covered that when we talked about humanistic therapy. This is Carl Rogers. So when they're talking about Carl Rogers, again, we pretty much covered this when we talked about humanistic therapy. It's the same theory. So you can just kind of read over that. Some more tests that I want you all to be familiar with. And these are really kind of get into the personality test. You have the, which one is this? This is the Eysenck personality questionnaire, where it gives us dimensions of basically our personality. Okay, so we have extroversion, introversion. Extrovert, you're going to be a person that's going to be the life of the party. You're sociable. You're going to be talkative. You're going to be outgoing. When you are a introvert, you are going to be more reserved to yourself, wallflower, kind of calculated and structured. And then you have the stable versus unstable, where you see here the person is moody, rigid, quiet, unstable, aggressive, excitable, where you have a stable person, they're controlled, they're calm, so you see the the domains and just kind of the differences between the domains, which these were totally way more reliable than the projective test, because these are qualities, these are traits and parts of our personality that we can actually observe and make a concrete, correct answer to. Yeah, of course, this is how I am, and it's not subjected to what I think. It's what you've shown, what you've displayed, what you've observed for yourself. All right, talked about introversion. You all can read over that in more depth. Just more information about extroverts. Another great test, personality inventory, want you all to be familiar with. Highly used, considered backed by empirical evidence. And when you see anything that's backed by empirical evidence, that means it has been researched, studied, and shown to be valid over and over and over and over again, valid and reliable. So this is a really great test that is still used and widely used with the military. And now they even have different versions to where it is broken down, even with children, careers, things of that nature. Initially it was created to identify emotional disorders and assess people's personality traits. They have some parts that you may see when you completed a online job application where it seems like it's asking you the same question over and over and over again in a different way. And if that is truly your personality, then you will answer the same way over and over again. But if it's not and you're trying to trick it, then you won't remember how you answered the previous 2 or 3 times when you answered it. And so you'll see that because it's looking for deception. And so it's highly used with the military. And with the military, what they were trying to do, it was identify emotional disorders. Why? Because we don't want to put someone in the front line of defense that is not stable, that's not emotionally stable. And can be used to identify people pretending to have a disorder. Why? Because the person will not answer the same way over and over and over again if you ask them a question that is very similar to the previous question. If you're telling the truth, you have no reason to lie, and so you will be consistent. If you're trying to fake something, you won't remember what you said because you're still trying to fake it. All right. It's just FYI. You can kind of read over that. I focused on I told you all about the social cognitive theories. You should have notes from that. That was one of the first things I discussed when I started discussing chapter 13. Self-esteem, really not going to focus on that, but please read over it. Self-serving bias, readiness to perceive ourselves as being favorable. Again, this is about our personality. And so when you talk about your personality, there you go to narcissism. Narcissists are people they can't get enough of them. And when they can't get enough of them, then if you state that they are a problem or have caused the issue, then you are the reason why that they did this. It's never going to be them. They're going to always be perfect and perfection, and very, very selfish minded. But that's a part of their personality. All right. And you can really just read over these different types of culture and self, talking about the individualistic culture and collectivistic culture. They've cut the terms now, but you can just kind of read over that. But please make sure that you listen back to the areas that I was highlighting for the purpose of your final exam. And that concludes the remainder of 13 on personality.